So, good morning, students. Today, Isocost will teach you about the production function, producer's equilibrium, and how it is determined using isoquant and isocost curves. And then today, majorly, I will discuss upon the isocost curve, that is the producer's budget line, and how to determine the slopes of this curve and also the intercept of this curve. Okay, and firstly, we will start with who is a producer and what he does, and then we shall discuss about the production function and how it is determined upon or dependent upon the technology, state of technology, and then what is a short-run production function and long-run production function, and gradually the basic concepts of producers' behavior that you have already got in your HS syllabus. Okay, so let's start. The first topic is production function. So what is a production function? Now, production function shows us the relationship between the output and the inputs used to produce that output. Now, say Q is the output and it depends upon labor, capital, and so on. Other variable inputs may be included, and the RHS side can be extended as far as to include more variables. Okay, so there is a relationship between this output and this inputs, and this relationship is defined or is explained by the production function. Okay, so this production function depends upon the level of technology. Whenever we speak about what is a production function, we define it as it is a relationship between the level of output and the level of input for a given state of technology. We always mention it is the relationship exists for a given state of technology. Okay, so why do we say this? Say you have a land. Okay, now in this land you are a producer or a farmer, and you are producing using labors. Okay, basically you are farming the land or plowing the land using humans or labors. Okay, so with this production function or with this technique of production, you might be able to produce only 20 kgs of rice. Okay, and then you thought of upgrading your technology. You are not happy with the production quantity or the produced quantity that you have attained by using the labor intensive mode of production. Now you want to upgrade your technology. Say now you want to farm this land using a tractor. Okay, now obviously it is understood that using a tractor on a big piece of land will be more efficient and will be more productive. Now within the same land, if you upgrade your technology and produce using a capital intensive mode of production, that is by introducing a tractor, you might be able to produce 40 kgs of rice. Okay, so previously the relationship between the output and the input used was based upon the labor intensive mode of production, and therefore you were only getting 20 kgs of rice. Now the production function is subjected to a new mode of technology or the new state of technology, that is the capital intensive mode of production, and now therefore you are able to produce 40 kgs of rice. So so we can say that the state of technology obviously determines how much we can produce using a given level of input. If a technology improvement takes place, we might be able to produce a higher amount of output for a given level of input. Okay, or we can say we might be able to produce the same level of output by a less amount of input compared to the previous state. Okay, so I guess this topic is clear, how production function is dependent upon technology. There is a relationship between production function is a relationship between quantity of output produced and the quantity of input used, and it also shows this on what factors this quantity depends and how it is dependent upon the state of technology. If the state of technology changes, the relationship will also change. Okay, now this production function always belongs to a producer. Now who is a producer? Producer is a person who is considered to be an uh, creator of utility, is considered to be an creator of utility, and we being the consumer are entitled as the destroyer of utility. Basically, the producer produces goods and services, and those goods and services consist of several uh, powers to satisfy our wants, and those powers are basically termed as utility. So we can say that the producer is a creator of utility. Okay, and we consume those goods and services produced by the producer, and we destroy the utility, we consume the utility, so we are termed as the destroyer of utility. Okay, now let us move to the types of production function. There are several types. For time being, we will just confine our knowledge to short run and long run production function. Now a short run production function looks something like this. Okay, now this bar implies that the capital is constant. First of all, the output is dependent upon labor and capital. Okay, and here the capital is fixed. We cannot change the amount of capital while for increasing this output. We can increase the level of output by only changing the variable input, that is the labor. Okay, so a short run production function is one in which at least one factor of production remains fixed. At least one. It can be more than one. If capital is also sorry, say we have some more factors of production such as labor and land. Okay, now we have three factors of production, and the land is fixed and the rest of the two factors of production are variable. Okay, so at least one has remained fixed over here. So one factor of production is fixed, and therefore we can term it as short run production function. It can be two also. Two factors of production are constant. So whenever we will see a constant factor of production, we will think it as a short run production function. Okay, and what is a short run according to you? It is a time frame which is not long enough to bring changes in all the factors of production. Okay, so the time frame is very short to bring about changes in all the factors of production, and therefore at least one of the factor of production remains constant. And now let us move to the long run production function. Long run production function. The long run production function, on the other hand, consists of all the variable inputs. It does not have any fixed input. The time frame is so huge that you can bring about change in any of the inputs. Okay, even land and capital, they are subjected to change in times of long run. Okay, so this was a distinction between short run and long run production function. In short run, at least one factor will remain constant, and in the long run, all the factors will remain variable. Okay. Then let us move to the isocost line. Now, for understanding producer's equilibrium, we need two tools. One is the isoquant curve that shows the level of output, which is similar to the indifference curve, and the other is the isocost line. Okay, so the isocost line is basically the producer's budget line. We have already studied the concept of budget line in case of a consumer, but in case of a producer we have a isocost line. It looks something like this. We have in case of budget line we have a good x, a good y over here and good x over here, but in case of a isocost line we will have two inputs, say capital denoted by K and labor denoted by L. Okay, and it looks something like this. Okay, so this is the producer's budget line. It is a locus of point. The definition goes something like it is a locus of point showing combination of two inputs. See, this is a point on the curve. Point A shows L1 amount of labor and K5 amount of capital. So the point A is showing a combination of two goods. Okay, or sorry, two inputs. So as I was saying, point A is showing a combination of two inputs. Similarly, point B will also show a combination of these two inputs in which labor is bit more than the previous one and the capital is bit less. Okay, so it is a locus of point, means it is a combination of points. All lines are basically a locus of points. They are formed by a combination of points, and each point shows combination of two inputs. And if a producer decides to use any of this combination of inputs, then he will end up exhausting his entire budget. Say a producer has 2 lakh rupees. Okay, 2 lakh rupees, and he has kept this 2 lakh rupees for producing a stuff, and he decides to purchase or use inputs in his production function as B. He has chosen the combination B, in which he has L2 amount of labor and K4 amount of capital. So according to the definition, if the producer chooses this combination B, he will end up exhausting his entire budget, that is 2 lakh rupees. Okay, he won't be left with any of the he won't be left with any of the surplus money. Okay, so entire cost outlay will get exhausted if you choose any point on this curve being a producer. Okay, however, you can see that the concept is similar to that of an budget line. However, if you choose a point below this curve, it will also show a combination of labor and capital. Say you have chosen this combination C, it is also showing a combination of labor and capital. However, if you use this combination, your entire budget won't get exhausted, rather you will be left with some amount of money. Okay, and any point outside this curve is beyond the reach of the producer, means उसके औकात के बाहर है. ठीक है, जितना उसका limit है, this is the limit of the producer. He can produce on this line or within this line. The difference is, if he chooses any point within this line or below this line, he will be left with some amount of his resources, or he will be left with some amount of his budget. And if he chooses any point on the curve, lying on the curve, then he can purchase it, or he can use that combination, but his entire budget will get exhausted. Okay, so we have understood what is a uh, isocost curve and what the points on the curve, below the curve and above the curve imply. Now we will move to the equation of the isocost curve. Now if you remember, we have already learned what the equation of a budget line is. The equation of a budget line looks something like Px, price of x into quantity of x plus price of y into quantity of y equals to income M. Okay. However, this was for the consumer. Now we have the producer over here and we have the isocost curve, and the equation will be pretty similar to this equation. The equation of the isocost curve will be pretty similar to this equation. However, the notations will be different. Say here in case of budget line we had two goods x and y. In case of isocost curve we have two inputs, labor and capital. So let us so in place of x and y we will put here labor and capital. Okay, and here we had written price of x into quantity of x. So we have written over here quantity of labor. So what we will write the price of labor along with it. And what is the price of labor? It is the wages. So wage rate into labor, that is the price of labor into quantity of labor, price plus price of capital. What is the price of capital? That is the rate of interest. Rate of interest into the amount of capital should be equals to C, the total cost outlay of the producer. So the equation follows the same format as that of the equation of the budget line. Price of labor, that is the wage, into quantity of labor plus price of capital, that is the interest, into quantity of capital equals to C. And this equation is for this line, the isocost line. Okay, and now it is important to understand the or understand how to derive the intercept of a curve. Whenever you draw a curve, it is very important to identify to how to derive the intercept of the curves because these two intercepts are the two extreme points of a curve. So intercept lies over here, over these 2 points. Okay, so how to derive the intercept? So this is the x-axis or the labor axis. So if we want to derive the intercept of the labor axis, we can derive it as follows. Let k equals to 0. That means we are not using any amount of capital. Capital is used 0 units. We are entirely using or producing the output using labor only. Then our equation will look something like this. Okay, this part will get disappeared, and therefore this can be written as L equals to C by W. So the intercept of the labor axis or the x-axis is C by W. Okay, similarly we can find out the intercept of the capital axis. It will be C by R. Okay, so this intercept shows C by W. The intercept shows the maximum level of labor that the producer can use if invest all his money or all his budgets in labor only. if he decides to not invest any of his money in purchase of capital and use only labor in his production, then this is the maximum amount of labor that he can use in his production. Similarly, if you consider this intercept, then it will show the maximum level of capital that the producer can use if he invests all his money in the use of this input, that is capital. Okay, so entire money is used if used in using capital, then this is the maximum amount of capital that he can use in his production, and this is the maximum amount of labor that he can use in his production. So intercept determines the maximum limit of any two inputs in this curve. Okay, and now we shall discuss about the slope of the curve. Now in case of a budget line, we know the slope of a budget line was given as py by px. Okay, and it was also given or it was accompanied by a negative sign, as it is a negative sloping curve. Similarly, it is also a negative sloping curve, so the slope will obviously have a negative sign along with it. And the formula for deriving the slope of any curve is given as perpendicular by base. Okay, so the slope for this curve will be perpendicular. So which part is the perpendicular part? This part, c by r part, this part. Okay, so the perpendicular amount is c by r, and the base amount, this part, c by w. Okay, and then what we will do, we will cut the c's and we will be left with r by w. So the slope of this curve is r by w, rate of interest by wage rate. So you can see the similarities and compare it with the budget line. In budget line, the slope of the curves were shown by the price ratios of two goods, and over here the slope of the isocost curve is being shown by the price of the two inputs. The price of capital is interest rate, that is r, and the price of labor is wage rate, denoted by w. Okay, so we have derived the slope of the curve and it has come out as r by w. Now the slope of the curve or any curve shows what will be the change in one variable if the other variable changes. Okay, or you can say what will be the change in capital if one unit of labor is, or one unit of labor changes. Okay, so slope shows the marginal change in the production function. If one unit of labor is increased, then how much amount of capital will decrease. Okay, so in this curve we know that we are seeing that it is a negative sloping curve. So any negative sloping curve implies that if we increase one variable over here or decrease one variable over here, then this variable is subjected to change. In this case, if I increase labor, then the capital needs to decrease. Okay, if I increase labor by 1 unit, then the capital needs to decrease by say 2 units. So the slope of the curve will be 2. Okay, so over here we can say that the increase or the increase in one variable is associated with the decrease in the other variable. Okay, as it is a negative sloping curve, obviously, because one increase in one variable will be related to the decrease in another variable, because if you increase labor by 1 unit and without decreasing the level of capital, then you will end up over here. That is a point which is beyond your budget, or that is beyond your cost outlay, and you won't be able to afford it. Okay, so to be in the within the budget, if you increase one if you increase one variable, or if you increase one input, then the other input needs to be reduced. Okay, you are already exhausting your income or budget at this point. Okay, so if you increase one input more, uh, then obviously you won't be able to afford it. You are already done with your budget at this point. More addition to one variable without decreasing the other, or more addition to one input without decreasing the other input, won't be affordable to you. Okay, so to make your bundle affordable, if you want to increase one unit of input, the other input needs to be reduced. So this was all about isocost curve. First we have defined what is isocost curve. It is a locus of point showing combination of two inputs, and if a producer wishes to purchase that input or use that input, he will be done with all his budget or his cost outlay. Nothing will be left with him. And then we have determined the intercepts. First we have determined the equation of the uh, isocost curve, and then we have determined the intercepts of the isocost curve, and then the slope. Okay, and then we have understood why it is a negative sloping curve, and what does the negative slope of this curve imply. And the negative slope implies if one input increases, then the other input needs to be decreased to maintain or to be in the budget of the producer. So this will be all for today. In the next class we shall discuss about the isocost curve and the law of variable proportion, and then we shall discuss about the production costs, short run costs and long run costs. So thank you for attending today's class.